Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. I'm so glad that you're joining us today. Today, I want to spend some time talking about one of the most important parts of the United States government, and that is the military. But not just the military in general. What I want to focus in on today is the damaging impact that the DEI ideology, the CRT, and what I call the wokeification of our federal government has had on the United States Armed Forces. Beginning with Barack Obama's administration, DEI and CRT began to be injected into all aspects of the federal government. But in the military in particular, Obama went on, basically carried out a purge of the ranks of our highest levels of military officers, replacing many general officers, that means people of the rank of general and above in the Army, and the related ranks in the other branches of government, based on nothing more than political ideology. And he was replacing American heroes who had a traditional understanding and appreciation for America's values, for Americanism, for the principles of the Declaration of Independence, and also for the purpose and the role of the military, replacing these individuals with woke warriors, if you will, with people who viewed the world through the skewed lens of Marxism and DEI and LGBT ideology. Donald Trump becomes president 8 years later. But Trump is under continuous assault by the left-wing media and the deep state that Barack Obama had instituted, including 2 impeachment efforts and many, many other challenges. And Trump, I don't think, even fully realized what had happened to the United States government or what wokeification had happened, the DEI principles and ideology and all of that stuff and what was going on until quite late in his administration. Then under the Joe Biden administration, what Obama did was put on steroids. DEI was mandated throughout the military, and our Armed Services Academy, like West Point, Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, and more. This replacement of senior officers, this injection of CRT and DEI, caused a major mission shift in the thinking of our armed services, causing our military to become focused on other priorities besides winning America's wars, besides defending this nation from our enemies, turning our military into a giant social experiment, if you will. But it wasn't really an experiment, now was it? No, this was an implemented agenda item. An agenda, DEI and the woke movement and CRT and LGBT ideology, all of this has a root. And the root, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sad to say, is actually communism, Marxism. Because communism has been coming after America for 150 years. But the Marxists realized that America was too strong. The Christian, Judeo-Christian culture in this nation, the biblically based mindset of the people in this nation, even if they weren't Christians, was so deeply entrenched and rooted in all of our institutions that the communists and the Marxists knew that it was going to take a systematic and prolonged agenda being implemented throughout our institutions to bring about the mind shift change that needed to take place in order to bring America down. And Obama, you remember when he was nominated and elected, and then a few days before sworn in, he said, I can't remember the number of days, but I think it was like 3 days or something, when he said, we are 3 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. and we thought it was just great rhetoric. Most people didn't realize that he's really talking about fundamental change, like changing the fundamentals, changing the foundation on which America was built, doing away with the principles of the Declaration of Independence, which were derived from Scripture. Because Obama, despite his lie to the contrary, was not and is not a Christian. He was and is a Marxist by philosophy, raised in it by his father and his mother. But this wokeification of our military resulted in the members of our armed services no longer being judged or evaluated strictly based on merit and performance, but instead now they're being evaluated based on skin color, sexual orientation, the degree to which they conform to leftist ideology in their daily affairs and in their speech and so forth. Mandatory CRT training and DEI training throughout the military and the armed services. Even to the point where we have general officers in the military violating federal law by refusing to comply with requirements. Take, for example, FOIA requests, Federal Freedom of Information requests, which would have caused the surreptitious nature of what they were doing to become public knowledge, or willful decisions by commanding officers not to comply with directives from the Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, because he's going to be out of office soon anyway. Because this agenda, this ends justifies the means ethic on the left of progressivism, is part and parcel with Marxism, part and parcel with wokeification. It doesn't matter whether you have to break the law or not, because the law is unjust anyway. The law is all built and established by oppressors, so it really doesn't matter. Do whatever you have to do to turn this country into a communist state. Is the mindset, is the culture. That's why we see so much corruption in the Biden administration and in the federal government now. But this mission drift that we've seen in our military is extremely serious. We have an adversary now, the People's Republic of China, which is not a republic and is not for the people. It's a Marxist communist state. But the PRC is our number one enemy. And I would say this, that China is actually stronger than Soviet Russia ever was. And they pose a huge threat to the United States on every front, militarily, economically, and culturally. And after these, if you will, 16 years of wokeification of our military, we are finding that there has been an absolutely debilitating effect on the military readiness, the preparedness of our military to fight our wars. For example, China now has a navy that is the strongest and most powerful in the world, with over 400 manned vessels. The United States, by comparison, only has 297. China doesn't patrol the world. No, China patrols China. And they do some international waters and stuff like that, but they're not trying to keep the peace around the globe. The United States is, and we've only got 297 ships compared to their 400. What happens when China attacks Taiwan, right? What happens when China begins to attack our Pacific fleet in various places, trying to secure a monopoly on shipping and other things? Are we going to be able to resist them? The Heritage Foundation has produced a report. It's called the 2024 Index of U.S. Military Strength. And I want to read some of it to you now. It says, as currently postured, the United States military is at significant risk of not being able to defend America's vital national interests. This is the inevitable result of years of prolonged deployments, underfunding, poorly defined priorities, wildly shifting security policies, exceedingly poor discipline in program execution, and of a profound lack of seriousness across the national security establishment, even as threats to U.S. interests have surged. In 2023, this has been compounded by the cost of U.S. support for Ukraine's defense and Russia's assault, which is further exacerbated by the limited willingness of allies in Europe to shoulder a greater share of the burden. And so let me give you another example. The fighter jet relied on by the United States Armed Forces now is the F-35. We still have F-16s, we still have F-15s, we still have F-18s, especially in the Navy. But the primary fighter jet attack aircraft in the United States military is the F-35. Our military leaders have said we really need 2,500 F-35s. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States has 640 F-35s. Not 2,500, 640. And the Heritage Foundation report makes it clear that America does not even have the equipment and the facilities to maintain the 640 fighter jets that we do have. We are in significant need right now. The good news is that Donald Trump has appointed as the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who understands that our primary mission is to win wars, and his intention is to restore the military back to that fundamental purpose, to destroy DEI in our military. And when we destroy DEI, don't think that we're doing that because we want to allow racism, God forbid. Before Barack Obama, the United States military was the least racist of probably any institution in the United States. It had devoted significant effort and attention to eliminating racism, to becoming colorblind. That's why our officer ranks and our non-commissioned officer ranks had many people of other ethnicities besides white. You remember Colin Powell became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Not under a liberal president, not under Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, but under George W. Bush, right? Colorblindness was necessary and important, and we had achieved great progress in that department, in that area. We have gone backwards now with DEI. We have become more racist, where race is now matters again. And our military has become demoralized. Recruiting, no branch of the United States military reached its recruiting goals at any time in the last several years. In fact, they were falling 25% short of recruiting goals. We were seriously short on manpower. But with this new focus in the Trump administration, recruiting jumped up to the highest level in 50 years in the month of January 2025, because people who feel called to the military, they understand this purpose, they understand this calling, and they want to be a part of it. They don't want to be a part of some, Marxist, wokeified political organization that pretends to be a military fighting force. And with Pete Hegseth's nomination and confirmation, I think we are beginning to be on the right track. And I have a special guest with us today to talk more about the wokeification of our armed forces, what he's done to fight against it, and what we have to look forward to in our country. Colonel Ron Scott is a United States Air Force retired officer. He's now the president and CEO of Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services, or STARS. He spent 30 years in the Air Force as a pilot, a war planner, a strategic analyst, and a commander. His assignments included the Pentagon, where he directed the Air Force 24/7 Operations Center and stood up a Readiness Center, and operational commands in the United States, Middle East, Europe, and Asia. After his career in the Air Force, Colonel Scott worked for another 21 years as a scientist in fields related to national defense and security, founding companies, serving as a college professor, and developing a major national level framework for understanding weapons of mass destruction. Colonel Scott is joining us today to talk about his work in STARS and where we stand in terms of our armed forces and whether they are actually ready to fight a major war. And I think you're going to find our conversation very informative and useful. Before we go to the break, though, I wanted to mention to everybody our free product that we're giving away now on Truth and Liberty, and it's this booklet, A Message to Teenagers from an Old Man. What a great title, right? This is a little 40-page booklet or so written by Andrew Womack. It's a message to teenagers talking to them about here's what I've learned after a lifetime of serving God, key lessons that you need to go know as a young person coming up today that will help you stay on track for God and to fulfill His plan for your life. You can get this for free by going to our website at truthandlibertygtn.com and claim your free copy today. So I hope that everyone will do that. Give it away as a gift to your teenage sons and daughters, or maybe your grandchildren, or maybe your nieces and nephews. All right, guys, we're going to take a short break, share some information with you. After that, I'm going to come right back with Colonel Ron Scott here on Truth and Liberty.
I want to let you know that we are having a Truth and Liberty Awards banquet on May the 2nd, and I'd like to invite you to be a part of it. This is a fundraiser. We are charging. We give out a great meal, and we're going to have Seth Gruber to be our keynote speaker. We're going to honor Abby Johnson, the one who the movie Unplanned was made about, and also Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, and it's just going to be a great time. If you can't come, we would encourage you to give and to support it. Remember, it's the 2nd of May, our Truth and Liberty Awards banquet, and I'd encourage you to be a part of it. You'll be blessed.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Truth and Liberty Show. Hey, before I get to our special guest, I wanted to remind everybody about the Truth and Liberty Awards Banquet. It is right around the corner, May 2nd, 2025, on the beautiful campus of Charis Bible College. We're going to be holding our 3rd annual awards banquet. And I tell you, the past banquets have been just awesome, and I know this one is going to be even better. We're going to be giving an award to Abby Johnson, who was a former director of a Planned Parenthood clinic. Her life story is featured in the movie Unplanned, and I tell you, she is a real hero. She has suffered so much persecution, but done so much to advance the cause of life. We're also going to honor retired Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, who is a flight surgeon in the United States Army. She stood up for the rights of our service members to resist the mandatory vaccine in the military, and we're going to give her the Samuel Whitmore Award. But you know what, also guys, Seth Gruber is going to be our keynote speaker, and I tell you what, you don't want to miss Seth Gruber. He is a powerful speaker, motivator, and he is the founder of the White Rose Resistance movement, and also is the creator of the 1916 Project, which shows the historical connection between the abortion movement and Marxism in America in an unbelievable fashion. It's going to be a great evening. You can get tickets on our website at truthandliberty.net. Also, if you want to support us financially here at Truth and Liberty, there's no better way than sponsoring our awards banquet. So if you'll go to truthandliberty.net, click on the link there for the banquet, and you can get information about how you can sponsor the event. Thank you so much. We look so forward to seeing all of you there. All right, guys, our very special guest today, as I said in our monologue, is retired Colonel Ron Scott. Colonel Scott, thank you so much for coming on the Truth and Liberty Show today.
Great. Thank you. My honor.
Well, it's great to have you. You actually live in the area here in Colorado Springs where the United States Air Force Academy is located, and you had a 30-year career in the U.S. Air Force.
Correct. I live 7 miles outside the North Gate.
So what's that saying about the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess?
Exactly.
No, we've got lots of retired military in this area, but Colonel Scott, I wanted to have you come on the show today because I'd like to talk with you about this endeavor that you're helping to lead called STARS. And can you tell us what that's about?
Sure. Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services is what STARS stands for, and it was conceived in July of 2020, so not that long ago. And it was prompted by being alerted to a football video that the Air Force Academy football coaches had published. Just 3 minutes, the coaches took turns chanting Black Lives Matter, and then they gave 5 examples of racial injustice. It embarrassed me because BLM riots are taking place across the nation following the George Floyd incident, and I realized the coaches had good intentions, but they didn't realize that they were actually celebrating or honoring a Marxist movement. The Black Lives Matter movement was founded by 3 trained Marxists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So that was at the beginning then of, well, it was at the end of the Trump administration, but leading into the 2020 election.
Correct.
And so you started STARS, and again, it's Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism in the Services. What's happened to our military since that time in terms of this racism and radicalism that you saw on that video?
Well, it was, I was oblivious to it. And so a good friend of mine, Lieutenant General retired Rod Bishop, was oblivious to it as well. We were working on our golf handicaps. So I wrote a blog article rebutting some of the accusations in that video and posted it. And General Bishop called me and asked for permission to send that to General Severia, the superintendent at the academy. So that was on 9 July of 2020. And all night long, my phone was humming with emails flying back and forth, including a lot of retired 3- and 4-star generals, arguing about this thing about this football video. And there were individuals defending it, saying, look, you know, we've got racism, we have systemic racism, and we need to do something about it. In fact, on 8 July, General Severia sent a letter to the academy family, graduates, parents, friends of the academy, claiming systemic racism in America, to include the academy. So this is where it really started to get deep for us. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request asking for a copy of the assessment that he had directed to determine the extent of racism at the academy. It took 3 years and a lawsuit by Judicial Watch to get a federal judge to compel the release of that report. So when we received the report, 167 pages, 52 entire pages were redacted. All the pages have been marked for official use only. So what do we discover? No evidence of racism, let alone systemic racism. But what they did by shielding that report from the public was train 90 cadets to be diversity and inclusion cadets with purple ropes on their shoulder, basically serving as political officers within the various cadet units, squadrons, group, and wing. So that was pretty alarming to us.
And the 90 cadets, are those the number of cadets that have been trained during the time it took for them just to produce the reports?
Correct.
It's interesting, this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, Colonel, but the color purple, my wife has noticed in the last 2 presidential inaugurations, certain people women wearing purple dresses, and how off it seemed when the colors of the United States are red, white, and blue,
right.
Including Kamala Harris and others. Do you think there's any significance to that in the purple shoulder, whatever you call that, or would you not know?
That's a great question, and I have no idea.
Another thing for you to investigate. I bet there is. So why on earth, if this was all above board and all legitimate and backed up by evidence and history and other stuff like that, why would it take the Commandant of the Air Force, I don't know if that's his title or not, why would it take him that long to produce that report?
I don't have any noble explanations. I think it was a deliberate shielding, that we have an agenda, an ideological agenda to pursue that they believed in. They felt it was just and right to level the playing field, to bring equity as opposed to equality, to bring equity into the ranks. So they wanted to be the judge for what they believed was fair. And by doing that, they had to discriminate against other people. So they were deliberately discriminating to overcome the sins of past discrimination. And there's authors that have written about that. It's better to be an anti-racist as opposed to a non-racist.
Well, and one of those is a guy named, I'm forgetting the full name, so I'm sort of just winging it here, Colonel, but his name was Ibrahim
Kendi.
Yeah. And didn't the United States Military Academy require that his book be read, or was it there, or was it the Joint Chiefs, or who? Where was that?
Chief of Naval Operations.
It was in the Navy.
That was one of the required readings on the CNO's reading list.
Okay.
Was how to be an anti-racist.
How to be an anti-racist. So this isn't just the Air Force we're talking about here.
That's DoD-wide.
DoD-wide, DEI, and that stands for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion.
Correct.
Throughout our military.
Right.
Okay. So I want to go back to my question earlier, though. If their motives were truly this is what we need to do to rectify racism and it's noble and so forth, if it's such a good thing, then why are you ashamed to produce the report?
It's a great question, and there's not a good answer for that.
Or scared. What is it they were scared of? And you may still not know today because they redacted probably all the useful information out of it.
Right.
Okay. And where does that stand now? Have you made an attempt to get the full report?
Yes, they refuse to give it. They keep citing exemptions in the FOIA statute that allows them to, but they're abusing that right because they should redact names, addresses.
Yeah. You know, when I was a kid, I'm sure you remember this too, we referred to America as the great melting pot.
Exactly.
Right? Where people from all races, all religions, all parts of the world can come to the United States, but when you come here, you don't aim to keep your culture the way it was. You blend in, become part of the whole stew, and you affect the flavor of the whole thing and make a great contribution to it. But that's a different thing, isn't it, than, gee, we're our own group and we want to stay our own group.
Well, which really drives home the danger of the ideology that underwrites all this stuff, critical race theory. It's all based on oppressors and the oppressed. And the ultimate oppressor, according to Kendi and some of these other critical race theory advocates, is the white male. If you're white, male, heterosexual, even worse. If you're white, male, heterosexual, Christian, holy smokes, that's criminal. And so that's the ultimate oppressor. All the other political identity groups are the oppressed. And so it really had its roots in a program called the Frankfurt School. These were German scholars that came to America, took up residence at Columbia University. It's called the Frankfurt School because they came from Frankfurt, Germany. Adorno, Horkheimer, Fromm, Marcuse were these scholars. They couldn't push pure Marxism in America because of the large middle class. So economic class warfare just would not work in America, even as far back as the 1930s. Can you just
pause and explain what you just said? Because of the large middle class.
Right.
Why wouldn't Marxism work here?
Well, because if you have mostly an upper class and underclass, you've got those divisions. But the middle class was a buffer between the greed and the envy.
So the average American's doing too well for Marxism to be appealing.
Exactly. So to divide America, then they had to find other ways of doing that. So they did it by political identity groups, blacks, ethnic groups, women, LGBTQ, transgenders. They all became minorities. And one of the things that happened, which recently, the 1619 Project, which talked about America being a racist country as far back as 1619, when we had slaves and also indentured servants that were having to pay off their debts to get back their freedom. And so they changed our history and the American creed, who we are, what we believed in, our values. And so we've been speaking around the country now about the American creed being threatened by radical ideology. And that radical ideology is the CRT that is applied via diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we call that a praxis. How do you put it in motion? Well, you put it in motion by the University of Michigan, for instance, had 500 employees under the DEI category, 500 diversity and inclusion employees with an annual budget of $30 million. Just one university, 500 diversity and inclusion positions.
Wow. Are these people that are enforcing DEI, or were these people who were hired because of DEI? In other words, we want to benefit you because you're from so-called oppressed group.
To enforce it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To apply it.
Yeah.
So there's an excellent book by Stanley Ridgely from Drexel University. It's called Brutal Minds. And he talks about how it's the student affairs groups at these universities that are the ultimate indoctrinators on these university campuses. So Brutal Minds, and it's a takeoff of Mao and Mao's Cultural Revolution. And so it's all built upon CRT DEI across the nation, universities. We see it at Columbia University right now.
Yeah. Well, so Colonel, let's go back a little bit to when you first started STARS. Of course, as you mentioned, that was an election year. Barack Obama won the election, defeated a veteran, John McCain, became president for 2 terms. I remember back then that he was intentionally replacing military leadership for DEI. I don't even know if we called it DEI back then. I don't know if that was quite out in the open, but he was doing it for DEI reasons and purposes. Can you comment on that? What
Sure.
did Barack Obama do?
Yeah, I've
military?
heard somewhere in the range of 200 to 300 senior military officials were encouraged to leave. But when I mentioned the final report of the Military Leadership Diversity Commission, that was March of 2011. 5 months later, August of 2011, President Obama issued an executive order establishing diversity and inclusion personnel and programs across the entire federal government. Thousands of employees pushing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when President Trump came into office in September of 2020 now, very close to the end of his first term, is when he became aware of this DEI corruption within our government. So he issued an executive order to cease and desist. That was September of 2011. So that brings into play an individual that's our current executive vice president, Matthew Lohmeyer, who's been nominated to be the Undersecretary of the Air Force. Matt was at Buckley Air Force Base up here in Denver, Colorado, Aurora, Colorado, when this took place. He was a squadron commander. He confronted his base commander saying, hey, the President of the United States has issued a cease and desist order. Why are we still doing these seminars and trainings? And the base commander, a colonel, said, because he'll be gone in a couple of months, and we need to teach our people about the discrimination that's taking place in our country. And so Matt was concerned about it. He elevated it and filed an IG complaint, and the day his complaint was dismissed was the day the base commander came out on the Brigadier General Select List. So the irony here is that Matt saw the ideology and its effect. People were getting out because of it. And he was trying to express his concerns with the leadership up the chain of command and getting pushed back on it, saying our hands are tied. But yet a base commander who violates the president's executive order, a UCMJ offense, gets promoted and rewarded for his defiance.
Did Matt's claim get dismissed, and did his commanding officer, did he get promoted after Biden won in 2020, supposedly, or was that still while Trump was president?
It was still while he was president.
Wow. Okay. So this is tantamount to rebellion, isn't it, against the order of the chief commander-in-chief?
And we see it right now. We get all kinds of indications that there's resistance among the ranks to do what we can to. I'll give you an example. Most recently, there was a direction to take down any DEI-related articles, that sort of thing. Well, they're going overboard, and now they're deleting stuff that, the person was a woman or the person happened to be black, but the article is about their achievement, not the color of their skin or their gender. So they're going overboard. And
yeah, well, Colonel, let's talk about the Air Force for just a second, because I think the Air Force has had a problem in this area for. They may be leading the branches. I'm not sure, but the Academy in particular. I remember a case that came up a few years ago of a cadet who wrote Galatians 2:20 on a little whiteboard that was on his dormitory room door, and he was disciplined for it and told not to do that.
Right.
In other words, the Bible is not allowed. We're not going to allow you to refer to Scripture here, and a clear violation of his constitutional rights. Are you familiar with that case?
Yes, very familiar.
Yeah, how did that happen?
Well, I'll share a couple quotes.
Okay.
From Antonio Gramsci, who's an Italian philosopher, Marxist.
Oh.
And it's related to your question.
Okay.
And then I'm going to talk about the Military Religious Freedom Foundation.
All right.
That gets involved with some of this stuff. And I regret to do that because I really don't want to give them any publicity. But Gramsci is a Marxist. He said socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society. Now, I'll point out in that Military Leadership Diversity Commission final report, when they talked about inclusion being better because assimilation subordinates subcultural differences, they said, so when you were taught that it's being colorblind and judging a person by the character, not the color of skin. They said in that report, no, we must be color conscious. Yeah. And so Gramsci talks about that by transforming the consciousness of society. And then he also said, the civilized world has been thoroughly saturated with Christianity for 2,000 years. Any country grounded in Judeo-Christian values cannot be overthrown until those roots are cut. But to cut the roots, to change culture, a long march through the institutions is necessary. And that's what we're up against. It's a Marxist movement disguised. A lot of people say, what do you mean Marxist? I'm not a Marxist, or I'm a communist. But you have to be judged by your actions and by what you're doing and the motivation for it. And so when you say it's okay to discriminate against white males because there's too many white males in the cockpit, that's fundamentally Marxist. Mm-hmm.
Well, and discrimination is wrong. Either it's right or it's wrong. It's not right because everybody who discriminates thinks that their discrimination is justified, right? So it doesn't make it right just because, oh, this is one direction, it's the other direction, right? I mean, it's still not treating people based on their status as an individual. It's lumping them into a category based on skin color or some other trait that's irrelevant to whatever is going on at the time, merit-based qualifications and so forth. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so not to give a speech here, but what are some of the damaging effects of DEI and CRT in the military in the last 10 years?
Well, morale, I'd say, is probably the biggest. On our website, we have a component called Boots on the Ground. Mm-hmm. And so our webmaster captures these comments that people make as they observe and reflect and react to things that are happening. And at one point, we had 110 pages of comments from people on active duty, veterans, family members, talking about what this is doing to our culture. It's divisive, it's damaging, it's depressing. And Matt Lohmeyer, in his book, Irresistible Revolution, shares comments he was getting from his own people, coming to him saying, geez, sir, I signed up for the Space Force because I thought it was, it didn't discriminate. But now all of a sudden I just discovered it does discriminate because they're being told of discrimination, which is unfortunate. And for me, in 1975, as a first lieutenant, I was asked to investigate a racial incident at one of our gates. This is in San Angelo, Texas. And what I discovered is that there was racism and discrimination within the security forces, the security police unit. And so at the end, I recommended letters of reprimand for all the individuals involved except for the squadron commander. I recommended an Article 15 and that he be relieved of command. The wing commander was a woman, and she agreed with the analysis, the assessment, and the recommendations. And then when I got ready to leave, I said, but there's one more thing that needs to be done. Ma'am, you need to call each of those individuals that were victimized that evening and apologize to them on behalf of the United States Air Force because that violates our values. Mm-hmm. And she said, but we'll be sued. I said, and rightfully so if that happens. But we were wrong and we need to be accountable. And she did. And to the person, they thanked her for having the courage and the decency to apologize for that. Nice. No lawsuits.
Well, it can't be denied that racism is a longstanding problem in America. But I've heard it said that the military, the United States military, made so much advances, so much progress in this area that it actually became the most integrated and least racist institution in the country by some measurements. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I like to tell that story because when racism does manifest, we have a moral obligation to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And we did in 1975.
But Ron, that can't be true because you're white. Right? You're inherently racist.
That's the unfortunate
I'm sorry, I'm being facetious, but so before Obama and before all this DEI and all this stuff, Did the United States military have training and programs already in place to combat racism?
Absolutely. In fact, I was a social actions officer. I was trained in my very first assignment. It was an additional duty, but I had to get trained on having classes with the troops and explain to them that the Civil Rights Act has made discrimination illegal, and it's okay to discern when you want to distinguish between something that's really good versus something that's good, but to discriminate based on the color of one's skin or their gender or whatever is against the law. And when that happens, then we need to correct it and hold people accountable. That was as far back as 1973.
Wow.
So we have been very proactive in terms of promoting non-discrimination among the ranks.
Well, and DEI is about more than race. It's also about sexuality and homosexuality and transgenderism. Has LGBT ideology been a part of what has infiltrated the military?
Yes, big time.
And what's happened as a result of that? What are the effects of that?
Well, that's a very difficult nut to crack, because people don't want to judge other people. But when the behavior can impact the morale of a unit, you have an obligation to do something about it. And that's part of the UCMJ. Good order and discipline. And commanders have an obligation to make sure that the climate in that organization is healthy. The LGBTQ thing is going to take a while to solve that. Even though, as a Christian, I find that lifestyle sinful, that's between the individual and God. But when their behavior now impacts my situation or another person's situation, it gets a little bit more complicated. And so when we had the don't ask, don't tell policy, even though I was opposed to that because I didn't think that a known person that had that particular lifestyle should not be part of the military, I was willing to tolerate that as long as they kept it private and personal and it didn't impact anybody else in the unit. But when they did away with it and started celebrating it, that's when, in my opinion, we started to cross that line into Marxist oppressors and oppressed again, that ideology. Most recently, I filed a FOIA asking who authorized a pride flag to be displayed.
Freedom of Information Act, yeah.
Right, Freedom of Information Act, a pride flag to be displayed right at the entrance of the base exchange.
Where was that? Here?
Here at the Air Force Academy.
Air Force Academy, okay.
It was the only FOIA of the 59 that we have filed, the only FOIA that got a response within the statutory requirement of 20 business days.
Okay.
And so I got 3 pages of email communications authorizing where the 10th Mission Support Wing authorized the display of that pride flag at the base exchange. But it was immediately taken down.
Yeah.
So just by raising the question, it made them realize that we have to be very careful about respecting someone's privacy, First Amendment rights, versus imposing an ideology on other people.
Well, and let's talk about mandatory vaccines during COVID if we can. I mean, I want to dig deeper on this stuff, but there's so much to talk about today. So the Biden administration required every member of the United States military to receive COVID vaccines, or the COVID jab, because the truth be told, they're not vaccines, but to receive that injection. And it's an experimental vaccine, untested, unproven. Now, here we are, 4 years later, and the truth is coming out, and we're realizing that there were many adverse health consequences from the vaccine, that it was not reliable, that it was not even effective to prevent the transmission of COVID. And yet, how many military personnel were dismissed, discharged, or reprimanded or penalized because of their refusal to take that so-called vax?
About 8,500 in the active forces. And they were forced out, they were discharged, given general discharge characterizations. And there was only one court-martial. All the rest were administrative discharges. And our analysis of that is because they denied due process. Due process would have been manifested in a court-martial. And so these vaccines, and in Secretary Austin's defense, the memorandum that he issued directing these vaccines, he said that if it's fully licensed, then they have to take it. But if it's not fully licensed, then informed consent is a requirement. Well, there were no fully licensed vaccines in America. So all the vaccines imposed upon our service members were an experimental version of, like the Pfizer, the Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, were experimental versions. EUA, emergency use authorized, was the classification. But yet subordinate commanders still forced compliance with getting the vaccine. And if they didn't, then they were discharged.
Yeah.
And so we had 8 federal courts, and we were working that pretty actively. 8 federal courts ruled that, that was a sham, what the Department of Defense was doing. We helped get cadets reinstated at the service academies who were booted. But we're working remedies right now with Congress. And there's different categories. We've got a position paper on our website that kind of laid out the facts and the circumstances and the obligation to set this right. Mm-hmm. And we're still waiting, and we're going to nudge Pete Hegseth here. We're still waiting for someone in a senior position to apologize to our American service members for what we did to them.
Yeah, well, I think we'll probably be waiting a long time on that one, at least to the ones who are at the top. But Colonel, you mentioned Pete Hegseth. He's the new Secretary of Defense under Donald Trump. Are you optimistic about reform and changes that are going to be implemented under his leadership?
Very optimistic. We've had a little connection to the Secretary before he became the Secretary, when he was with Fox News. And our Executive Vice President, Matt Lohmeyer, has been on Fox Nation a couple times with the Secretary before he was selected as Secretary. And the reason why I think we have the right man in the position is, first of all, he's very Christian. Mm-hmm. He's a redeemed Christian. And he understands the heart and soul of our military. It's more moral than it is technical. And when you let your troops know that you can't be trusted, that you're going to force them to do things, and you punish them for things that they shouldn't be punished for, you're not going to have a fighting force that, even if they had greater numbers in China or Russia or any other foreign opponent, because they're depleted morally, they just can't do what they need to do to fight for our national security.
Well, and if you're in an organization that's supposed to be colorblind, and you're in an organization that is there to defend American values, yep, and you work your hardest to do your best, and you get passed over, and somebody else is advanced ahead of you because of their skin color or because they're gay or homosexual, what does that do to your morale?
It's what I would call a moral injury. We hear about PTSD mm-hmm. all the time, but in my opinion, there's a more debilitating condition, and that's a moral injury. When you realize that you've been part of something that just violates your set of principles, the core of your Christian beliefs and that sort of thing, it's depressing. And one of the deadly sins, despair, is what happens there. Example: when we were tracking the number of deaths from COVID, there were like 98 during a certain period. Compare that to the number of suicides. There's almost 600. 90 plus compared to 600 suicides. That's moral injury right there.
Wow, the spiritual disease is far worse than the physical disease.
Exactly. And so Pete Hegseth's he's going to bring back trust and confidence in the military.
Well, speaking of morale, Colonel, I want to ask you 2 questions at once here, but where do we stand in terms of military readiness today? And do we have a serious recruitment problem? Because I've heard that none of the branches has reached its recruitment goals in recent years. And can you sort of address that for us?
The second one first. Recruiting is the worst it's been since 1973, when we became an all-volunteer force. But January set all kinds of records because of the perception of trust and confidence again from our senior leadership. That, to me, was a very telling sign. So our recruiting is going to get better. In terms of our readiness, we are in dire straits. One of the position papers we've circulated with Congress is the need for national defense reform, to include our health Defense Health Agency. It's all messed up. But when we look at like the Maritime Academy and the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, they come under different departments: Homeland Security and Transportation. They've been really treated as a stepchild, I think, in terms of funding. And so when you think of the Merchant Marine, these are the individuals that serve as captains on our commercial sea vessels. When you think about if we went to war with Korea, for instance, back when we were planning on such a possibility, only 5% of the force that would be positioned in Japan and in South Korea would come by air. 95% would come by sea. And so you can halt an advance in another region of the world, but in order to push back on it and then to achieve victory, you have to sustain that then with forces that you bring to the fight. That's going to happen through sea lift. 60% of the vessels that would be involved in that right now are not operational.
Well, yeah, I was reading a report. Speaking of the Navy, it says the Navy needs a battle force consisting of 400 manned ships. China has approximately 400 naval vessels, right? The United States currently has 297.
Yep.
And that we need 400 manned ships to do what is expected of us today. China doesn't patrol the world, we do, and yet we've only got 297 ships compared to their 400. Its current battle force fleet of 297 ships reflects a service that is much too small relative to its tasks. This is from the Heritage Foundation Index of Military Strength, by the way, pretty reputable organization. It says, given current and projected shortfalls in funding for shipbuilding, the Navy is unable to arrest and reverse the decline of its fleet as adversary forces grow in both number and capability. Compounding the shortfall in capacity, the Navy's technological edge is narrowing relative to peer competitors China and Russia. So we can't say, oh, well, but our technology is better. We can't really say that anymore.
No, we can't.
And then you mentioned fighters, right? The F-35 is the modern primary fighter jet for the United States, right?
Correct.
And I read in this same report that we have 600 and something F-35s, and yet the military has acknowledged that it needs 2,500 fighter F-35s. So we've got 640, we need 2,500. And is it true, Colonel, that we don't even have the equipment and facilities to maintain the jets that we do have?
Correct. Right.
Yeah. So what are we going to do?
Well, we need Pete Hegseth to come in, clean out the corruption, which he's doing right now. And for those that understand the role that they play in making sure we're ready to get them refocused and to do what we can to start rebuilding.
And to what extent is this whole DEI and woke stuff and CRT, all of that being injected into our military, to what extent is that responsible for this state of unreadiness that we find ourselves in?
It had a huge impact because it relates to culture. And so when it changed our culture from an American creed to one that was more Marxist driven, instead of uniting and achieving cohesiveness, striving for excellence, it became divisive. And I mean, there's just, Lincoln said, a house divided cannot stand. And so DEI is, in my opinion, has been the most serious and damaging cancer to affect the readiness in our military.
Well, so your vice president, you've referred to him many times on the show, Matt Romeyer, former officer in the Space Force, is now under consideration for a pretty high post in the DoD.
For the Undersecretary of the Air Force.
Undersecretary of the Air Force.
Right.
So STARS is making progress.
A lot of progress. We have exceeded our expectations,
Yeah.
Which is great. I mean, we're humbled by it because we served our nation. I served 30 years and then more if you think about other national security related stuff. I believed in it. I went to the Air Force Academy initially because I could afford it. But the culture really resonated with me. I mean, these were individuals who believed in their country and would do whatever they had to do to make sure that they were ready to fight for it and to be successful. And so to me, I liked that, and I wanted to be worthy of it. And so I would do whatever I had to do to make sure that, I was doing my part and setting a good example, whatever. And so to me, I felt betrayed when I saw a lot of things that were happening. And I felt for our young people who were being exposed to that.
Well, how can people learn more about STARS?
Well, stars.us, and we've got a world-class website. Our webmaster is former CIA, counterintelligence, and so
Nice. Be careful going to that site.
It's
No, I'm just kidding.
so and she still stays very well connected. She's got a
Fantastic.
great network, does a lot of analysis for us, but I would consider our website a repository of data, of evidence. And so we've got podcasts, we've got articles, position papers on the website. And if you visit our leadership, our directors, the board of advisors, we've really been blessed to have attracted. I mean, they came to us. We didn't recruit. They came to us to say, hey, we see what you see and we want to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
And so as an example, one of our our advisors is a Dr. Lanny Cass. Lanny was born in communist Poland. Her family moved to Israel. She got a PhD there, her first of 2 PhDs, served as a fighter pilot flying F-4s in the Israeli Defense Force. I mean, she's got combat time. And then she comes to the United States by choice to become an American citizen, got another PhD, and she is, sad to say, at Columbia University.
Wow.
But she was on the faculty at the National War College for 20 years. And so a lot of the admirals and generals right now roaming the halls of the Pentagon were her students. And she served as a political advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
And she works for STARS.
She's one of our advisors.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we're out of time, Colonel. I am so thankful for you taking time to come on Truth and Liberty today. It's been a fascinating discussion. And I just want to, in a few seconds here, you are donor supported, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so folks, so if you believe in what Colonel Scott is doing with STARS, I want to encourage you to go to the website. Again, what is it? It's STARS.
US.
Okay, STARS with 2 R's. .us, and make a contribution today to help him in his important work. Also wanted to remind everybody about the free gift we're giving away, a message to teenagers from an old man, a booklet by Andrew Womack for teenagers. Go to the website at truthandlibertygtn.com and you can get your free copy today. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to having you again next time on Truth and Liberty.